Hi, Jill Werner here, and I am a physiotherapist specializing in brain injury, stroke, brain injury, and Parkinson's. So anything neurological or anything brain related. And I'm super, super excited to talk to Dr. Jeffrey Fannin today. And let me just tell you a little bit about his history, and you'll understand why I am so excited. So, Dr. Jeffrey Fannin holds a PhD in psychology, an MBA, and a Bachelor of Science degree in Mass Communications. He's the founder of a clinic and research center, Thought Genius, in Glendale, Arizona. He's worked in the neuroscience field, researching and training the brain for over 23 years. Dr. Fannin is an international speaker, authority, and author in the field of optimal brain performance and cutting-edge neuroscience research. Just that line alone gets me excited. Last year, he was in a movie called PGS Intuition that has been playing in theaters around the world and is available to rent or own on Vimeo. And there is also a book on Amazon about the movie. He's traveled the world doing brain maps on over 4,000 individuals, as well as doing consults with them. He also works in his clinic with ADD and ADHD, anxiety, depression, and many other conditions. And he has a big following on Instagram as Dr. Brain Fitness. So you can see why I am so excited, because I love and am a nerd about all things brain. And I'll just mention his website also is thoughtgenius.com, which I love that name. So Dr. Fannin, welcome, and thank you for hopping on with me. I think we're gonna talk first about brain mapping and the EEGs and some exciting things that you've seen happening and how we're changing some pathways in ourselves. So I'm just going to pass it over to you because I can't wait to hear everything that you're going to talk about.
Well, Jill, thank you so much for having me on today, and I really, really appreciate it, and look forward to passing on some of the information that I have to other people. Let me share my screen, and then we can kind of go from there. Talk about, give me 1 second here. So you should be able to see my screen now. And one of the things that I wanted to kind of help people understand is what exactly is am I working with when I have started looking at NRF1, NRF2, and Axio. So I had a young man, and when I first got involved with some of this stuff and looking at the science of it, which is really what captured me, and looking at the science. And then I started working with this young man who had ADD and had been suffering with it for quite a while. And I wanted to see how this worked because I read the science, but then I wanted to try it on some of my patients and see, does this stuff really work? And then I had no idea that I was going to find what I found. So we put him on this regimen of NRF1, NRF2, and Axio. We can talk more about that a little later, but put him on that for about 12 days. So I'd been doing some brain maps. He'd been doing brain training with me in my clinic on being able to deal with his ADD. So just very quickly, these are just some of the brain maps here that we're looking at. This is the before over here. We have, and I won't get too deep into this, we have different frequencies from 1 all the way up to 30 hertz. And oops, took me back in a place I didn't want to be there. Sorry.
That's okay.
All right. Yeah, I touched the mouse and it advanced this thing. All right. So anyway, on the left here, and we can see very active brain here. This is Neuroscience 101 here as we look at standard deviations underneath here. And so we have -3 to +3. And the red down here is 3 standard deviations above normal. So then we put him on the regimen of NRF1, NRF2, and Axio for about 12 days, did a brain map again, and then this is what I saw. And you look down here at 11 through 20 hertz, and
Wow.
the green means it's functioning in the normal range. So I looked at that and I said, how is that physically possible to happen? Because I really did not expect to see this, and started looking at that and trying to figure it out. So I would explain it, well, it must be the equipment, it must be the cap, it must be, something. And that's not really what I found. I found that everything checked out okay. So when we look at his brain map from 21 hertz all the way up to 30, you don't have to be a neuroscientist to interpret this here. So
Right.
you can see all of the red, 3 standard deviations above normal. Very busy mind that's going on there, basically. And then 12 days later, we're all in the normal range. So also looked at some other factors. One is called coherence. And so this is how our cells interact with one another. And so this is his coherence in the different frequency ranges here.
Can
And
you
we see
explain coherence? I heard you say quickly that it's how our cells speak to each other, but maybe just go into a little more detail on what is coherence. Because
we have 600 million trillion cells in the body. And this is one of the things that I was looking at when I couldn't quite explain what I was seeing here. And we had all of this in the green. And I looked at that and I said, well, we must be getting down to the molecular level and looking at the quantum physics side of this. So that's what I began to examine, how this could happen so quickly. So we have 600 million trillion cells in the body. And it's very important for those cells to be able to interact so that they can communicate with one another. And that's what was going on here. We had opened up a pathway that allowed these connections so that the cells could talk to one another. And it didn't really cure his ADD, and that's I'll continue that story here in a few minutes. But basically what was happening is the mom was getting calls, 2 or 3 phone calls a day from the school, suggesting, he's being belligerent, he's not bringing in his homework, he's acting out, things like that. And so we really didn't expect this. We were just doing normal neural feedback with him. And once we put him on here, then one day mom showed me a note from one of the teachers saying, wow, what a turnaround. Now he's actually bringing in his homework. He's actually functioning. They were hardly getting any calls from the school, where before he was getting all D's and F's. Now he was getting A's and B's by the end of the school year. So it opened up that pathway to function normally. And there were gaps in his learning, which caused him to not be able to do what he needed to do with the ADD. So once that pathway was opened up, and I found that coherence happens to be one of the key elements in all of this, that our cells have to be coherent in order to interact with one another, to pass information. So once he got the tutoring that he needed, then he began to get rid of all of the ADD-like symptoms that he was having. And by the end of the school year, getting A's and B's. So
this kind of helped to calm his mind so that he was able to learn. I just want to, because I know that from my perspective as from a PT perspective, that we're taught that executive functioning or decision making is at the front of the brain, and that's the area that's showing very red there.
right.
There's a lot of busyness and a lot of noise and thoughts jumping around, probably. I'm just asking if that's the case.
Well, yeah, basically when we look at the prefrontal cortex here, which is up here in the front of the brain, oops, I'm back here. If it's on the left side, this is when people are having more positive thoughts. They're not racing thoughts, things. So the glass is half full. On the right side, when we have the dominance here, the glass is half empty. So that's kind of what's going on here, without getting too deep into it. So we see that that's where he's coming from. There are other factors that are involved in his ADD. Let's take a look at, and go back to the slide here of his coherence. So the blue means it's underactive and red means it's overactive in these different areas, different frequency bands. then after he had been on the regimen for about 12 days, when we see very few lines or no lines at all, it means it's functioning within the normal range. So his coherence had gone back to normal as we take a look at going from this depiction of the brain map, the QEEG, and then it being pretty much normal. And we see, another representation which helps us understand that his coherence had gone into the normal range. So that's why coherence becomes a very, very important factor in how our brain and our body is functioning.
That's absolutely incredible. That's an enormous difference on both types of slides, looking at the coherence and then looking at the QEEG. Wow. So do you want to talk a little bit more about coherence and why that is so important?
Sure thing. Let me jump out of this and bring up a different slide here. Um, People ask me that question all the time, what is coherence? And depending on whether you're talking physics or brains or whatever, talk to 12 different people are going to give you 12 different answers. But basically, it gets down to dealing with our autonomic nervous system. So there are two parts to the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system and then the parasympathetic nervous system. So let me add another piece here. When we are looking at coherence, there are three electromagnetic centers in the body that become very, very important. One is the electromagnetic centers around the chakras. The second one is the electromagnetic center around the heart, and then the electromagnetic center around the brain. What a lot of people don't understand is that the electromagnetic center around the heart is 60 times greater than the electromagnetic center around the brain. So there are more signals going from the heart to the brain than there is from the brain to the heart. So they're actually the afferent signals that are going up through our sympathetic nervous system from the heart to the brain is causing that to be activated. So that's when we feel out of sorts, feeling like anxiety or ADD or depression or whatever is going on. We're sending the signal. So we're looking at a lack of coherence inhibits brain function by doing this. So the sympathetic nervous system just gets overly activated. Then we have what we call efferent signals coming down through the vagus nerve to the heart, which allows this rhythm of coherence. And so we can have this rhythmic function that balances the difference between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, just to give you a kind of a quick example of some of this, let me find this slide that I'm looking for. So here is an example of somebody who had been trained with coherence, or a police officer, and dealing with a domestic violence scene. So here on the left, we're actually seeing the heart rate, and on the x-axis down here is all time. So this event takes place over about 30 minutes. So you can see the police officer's heart rate is around 81, 82, fairly normal. So as it gets closer to this domestic violence scene, his heart rate begins to go up. So we have about 5 or 6 minutes of time going on here. Now, we have to kind of understand a little bit about physiology, and that is that during this 5 or 6 minutes, the cortisol that is being built up in the system can take over 2 to 3 weeks to get out of our system unless you have a different way of dealing with it, and that is coherence, getting into a coherent state. So his heart rate gets up to around 180, 182, something like that, for this space of 5 or 6 minutes. Then because of his training with coherence, within a matter of a few minutes, he's able to bring it back down, and in a space of about 6 or 7 minutes, get back to a normal range. So that cortisol is not taking its toll on dealing with, our adrenal glands and things like that, which tend to give us that adrenal burnout kind of thing.
So that's that fight or flight response. And normally we have that jump in cortisol, but that takes a long time for normally when we're not trained with the coherence training, it takes a long time for our body to get rid of that cortisol.
That's correct. So that's why coherence becomes a very, very important factor. And if we go back to this other slide here, you can see when we do not have the coherence, that it inhibits our brain function. But when we are in coherence, it actually facilitates the brain function by bringing in a balance between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right.
So,
we talked a little bit about the vagus nerve which runs between actually the gut and the brain. So
right.
again, bringing that whole connection between the body and the brain, or the gut and the brain, and that being necessary for our body to be in coherence as well, which is really interesting.
Right. So it's one of the things that I was able to do with some of my studies here. Let me get back to this, and we'll kind of get this right here. I did a study. I have some equipment where I can measure what's called gas discharge visualization, and allows us to look at things like our chakra centers, the energy field. So this is a study that I did with an individual that had prostate cancer. And when we look at this line up here that you can see, that is the normative database. There's over 5,000 individuals. So it's using this person's demographics, male, female, left, right hand, age, in order to see what that is. So we can quantify each of these chakras and look at them. So when we're looking at things like coherence, the size of the balls here indicate how much energy is there. But the coherence deals with this electromagnetic center around the heart. Well, let's take a look at what happens after being on this regimen for about, I think it was 13, 14 days that we had them. And you see the difference in the size. Let's compare those side by side. And you can see the smallness of the heart chakra here, indicating that there is less coherence going on. Then when we open up those NRF1, NRF2 pathways, we can see the increase in the heart chakra, meaning that electromagnetic center is actually increased its capacity to deal with this, and did it in a short period of time. Now, how do I actually know some of this? When I work with the coherence, I'm a certified trainer for HeartMath also. And so I've worked with coherence and measuring that and teaching people how to increase their coherence so they can utilize this really under any circumstances. So if they have a lot of stress, or with some of the students, they sit down to take a test and it's very stressful, they can simply get into high coherence. So let me explain kind of what that means. So we have a device you can clip on your ear, and they can learn how to do this. So we're starting this short sequence January 31st of this year, and so we have a low, medium, and high coherence that's going on here. You see his high coherence is only getting up to about 57%. So a few days later, on February 2nd, we still see his coherence, his high coherence, at 57%. Then shortly after that, I got a call from this guy, and he said, "I think this thing must be broken." I said, "No, it's not broken." And he had gone on February 8th, so some 6 days later, to 100% in his high coherence. So he kept working with this a couple times a day, 5-10 minutes a day. And here we are, February 10th, the end of the cycle that we were working on. And he was still at 100%.
And this is an unusual outcome.
It's a fairly usual outcome with people. You know, once they learn how to do this, then anybody can increase their coherence. So we just have a device that lets us measure what that is. It's kind of like if you were looking at your cholesterol. You can't feel your cholesterol. So you have to have something to measure that to give you a better understanding of how it works. So this is about measurement. This is about measuring these things with the EEG, the QEEG, with the gas discharge visualization stuff to look at. Let me dive just a little bit deeper here to increase your understanding. So with these bar graphs here, on the left side, this is his emotional energy, and on the right side is his physical energy. So this integral area that we see is actually how well is his body producing the biophotonic energy that is being used. So emotionally, it's in the green or the normal range. And over here on the physical, it's also in the green or normal range for that to happen. Now down here, we have the integral entropy. How well are we using that energy that's going on in our body? Emotionally, he's still in the green here, which is very good. But over here on the physical, he's slightly into the yellow, which means he's burning up a little too much physical energy to deal with it. And this may have something to do with his prostate cancer, why we're seeing this. Now, another factor down here is what we call activation coefficient. So down here in the pink that we can see, this means that this person is in protection mode. They're protecting the energy that they have, they're guarding. And I see this with a lot of people, but when we go to the end of the cycle of being on NRF1, NRF2, we can see, all of these physical and emotional are pretty much the same thing. But his activation coefficient goes from down here in the pink all the way up into the normal range in just a matter of 11 days for this. So that's pretty amazing in my book.
Mm-hmm. So this doesn't normally happen as quickly as it's happening.
Well, it depends on the individual. So I have some individuals that take longer. It depends on what's happening. Depends on, how willing they are to do it. In this case, he was using the device twice a day, 5 to 10 minutes, once in the morning, once in the evening. And a person could do this as many times as they want. So some of the patients I have will do it several times a day. So if they feel anxiety coming on, they can sit down and begin to measure this and feel what it feels like. And we're dealing with the essentially what we call one of the techniques deals with heart-focused breathing. So we are breathing in and out, which breath in and of itself is very relaxing and being able to balance and bring in that parasympathetic nervous system. But heart-focused breathing, we imagine that we are breathing through our heart and it's sending that signal up through the afferent signals and then receiving down through the vagus nerve the balancing effect that goes on. So then they learn what that feels like.
Yeah.
And so they can literally go there once they've kind of trained and understood how it works.
That's very, very cool. So how do you feel that the NRF2 and NRF1 and the Axio changed the outcome or the speed of the outcome for these individuals?
Yeah, let me kind of go back up here to this and look at this slide here. Well, the reason that I think it happens so quickly is it opens up that the ability of our cells to communicate better. And so taking that 600 million trillion cells and allowing them to be dynamic. In other words, they can communicate more actively with the information that's coming into them. So in this case, being able to activate that pathway, if you want, down at the molecular level so that that communication could take place. And in this case, the individual could continue to learn and be more receptive to learning. And eventually they were able to increase their brain's ability to focus, to concentrate, and to deal with these things and on a much more normal level.
Right, which means it's going to be easier for them to learn new tasks, new information as they go forward, which means that they can build on that new information.
Exactly, because normally what happens is, let me go down to this particular slide. When we look at coherence that it's out of balance. So the red part that we see here is the brain fragmenting, essentially grabbing little bits and pieces of information. So any kind of a distraction that comes along, and you see the prefrontal cortex here is blue. So basically it's not functioning as well as it should. So it's getting all this information, gathering it, and trying to get bits and pieces, and then pull it all together and say, what does this really mean? And anything that comes along can distract them. So that lack of coherence becomes vitally important in our ability to concentrate, to focus. And so we see that happening here in the coherence where it's functioning in the normal range. And that's what allows the individual to continue to stay focused, concentrate, use the learning techniques that they've been taught in school, and recall that information. So just imagine yourself sitting down to take a test, and if you have all of this over coherence, the abundance of that going on, it's very difficult for you to focus on a test, and that's why they don't score well. Make sense?
Wow, this is enormous. This is an enormous, this will have such an enormous impact on this person's life, but on any of our lives. I feel like we live in a world of distractions and things looking for our attention. And I look at my phone right beside me.
Yeah, I'll throw a little statistic out here. A few years ago, they measured that the average person's attention span was about 12 minutes. Within a matter of less than 10 years, it had gone down to 6 minutes.
Wow.
Less than 6 minutes now. So that's why we get these distractions. I don't know about you, but I get bothered by, you're working on your computer and you get these little notifications coming in, and it's just distracting you. Technically, what we're doing, because of the neuroplasticity in the brain, is we're training our brain to be distracted.
Be distracted, exactly.
Right. And so when we look at other factors involved, like oxidative stress, that's on the rise because of the toxic chemicals that are out there. Back in 1976, there were 67,000 toxic chemicals, and today there are over 80,000 toxic chemicals, which are causing us to have great difficulty in staying centered, staying balanced, and most diseases are caused by oxidative stress, or if you take an apple and you cut it in half and it turns brown, that's oxidative stress. So all of these things that get into our food, our water, the air that we breathe, and things like that, is having an effect on our health. And it's very important. And there are a number of studies that maybe one day we can talk about some of those.
Yeah, I would love to. Oxidative stress / inflammation, I always say, and is contributing to that brain scan on the left, right? What's happening in that brain, that oxidative stress is definitely contributing to that kind of ping pong effect almost of thoughts.
Right. Yeah, and I actually have some tests that I do with people to help look at the inflammation in the body.
Yeah.
So poke their finger, put a little bit of blood on this card, send it into the lab, and then we get a report back. There's also a 15-minute thing that they can do online for their brain functioning, so we can see how fast it's functioning, the memory, the all of the factors that deal with this, and see where they are. And it also helps project the longevity of this individual to see how the brain is functioning and how it's going to affect our life later on down the line.
Wow. This has been super, super interesting. Thank you so, so much for taking the time to get together and explain this in more detail for me and for everybody that we get to share it with. This has been fascinating. So do you have any last thoughts that you want to share before we sign off?
Well, yeah, I think everybody needs to take a look at themselves and say, it's like the cholesterol thing we were talking about earlier. You may not know what your cholesterol is, but it's about testing. It's about understanding where am I, and then what are the things that I can do, because we have things that can open up those pathways. We have things that can reduce the inflammation. We have things that can give us more energy, repair the mitochondria in our brain. And so I think it's very good for people to know and understand, where am I and what do I need to do in order to increase the longevity, increase my brain performance, and just have a better quality of life.
That's right, because they say that this is something I hear all the time. I'm 51, and people have brain fog, or brain farts is another one I've heard, but they're forgetting things, forgetting dates, why they walked into a room, where they put their keys, all little, quote, air quotes, little things, but it's written off to normal for your age. And I completely disagree with that. That
Yeah,
is,
I would disagree as well.
we should be able to, we don't even really realize that our brain health is changing, that our body health is changing, and it's not normal. And it is because of a lot of the things that we're exposed to, whether it's attention, our attention being distracted, or the toxins that we're exposed to, or lack of sleep, or poor
Yes,
diets,
yeah,
or
that whole cortisol thing that we were talking about. Usually the first thing to go is your memory. So that's why you walk into a room and say, why did I come in here? Where did I put my car keys? That kind of thing, because it gets distracted. We're training our brain to be distracted. And then the cortisol just is like fuel for the fire there.
That's right. Yep. So interesting. Well, thank you so much. I do think that we have our hands on something quite incredible. And the reason that I feel like it's so incredible is because I've seen it over and over and over again in myself and family and friends and patients, and to see what the difference can be when we decrease the oxidative stress, increase how our mitochondria are performing, and how that affects our health. Sometimes we don't even know that we aren't feeling that great until we start to feel good. And
I'm a living testimony of that. And that's a story for another day here.
yeah.
The stroke that I had, didn't see it coming, and how these products saved my life.
Wow. I can't wait to talk about that.
All right. Sounds
All
good.
right,
Thank
Dr.
you, Jill.
Fannin, thank you again so much for sharing this information. It was absolutely incredible.
Thank you.